concludes all operations of the emergency alert system. All stations may now resume regular programming.
For expanding its sphere of influence on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy.
Okay, so I wrote a whole piece about the midterms, but I'm sure you've heard quite a bit about that over the last few days or so. And really, the more I thought about it, the more I realized we have a lot of problems to talk about. Really, really big problems. So instead, what we are going to try to do is talk about the midterms, but weave in and out of various different topics. I'm going to try to make it interesting. Yes, we're going to talk about a lot of different things, from the corrupt media and collusion with the government, to Jeffrey Epstein and rogue intel agencies. Now, it's all kind of connected, and hopefully I can articulate this without sounding, insane. But yeah, let's talk about some crazy stuff. Now, this video is going to be quite the black pill, with the hopes that stirring up this conversation, I don't know, maybe we can get some perspective on what exactly the future will hold. However, to alleviate some of the black pill pain, let's start with a white pill. So, it went well for Republicans, but it was not a red wave. However, my advice would be tempered reason. There's no reason for the doom and gloom. It wasn't bad. Now, I've tried waiting, but I cannot wait anymore. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm recording this on Friday, and we still do not have the complete results. However, it does appear that Republicans will control the House, and we'll see what happens with the Senate. Overall, though, not bad. There is one big aspect, though, that we have to mention: the Uniparty. The GOP worked against some of the candidates and sabotaged Alaska. Yes, Mitch McConnell ran a second Republican, splitting the vote, giving it to Democrats. And that was exactly what they wanted. Well, actually, it appears that there might be a runoff, but they will sabotage it again. There is a Uniparty. The GOP establishment is the same as the Democrat establishment, working towards global initiatives in spite of the US citizens. They do not represent you. If there's ever going to be real change, you have to change the leadership of both parties. They're in cahoots, I'm telling you. And really, I couldn't say it any better than this. Here's a clip of Jimmy Dore.
Honest to God is really the most important election ever. So, okay, yes, you should vote. And it should be for the one party that still stands for democracy preservation.
At first, I thought he was joking. He's not joking. The democracy in the United States was stolen a long time ago, Bill. This idea that somehow one party cares about democracy while the others doesn't. They both serve the same corporatocracy, an oligarchy run by corporations. And instead of having a dictator, the dictator has now been replaced with the nameless, faceless corporate state, which controls every part of our being. They control our free speech, what medical treatments we get to experience. The only difference between a Democrat and a Republican is the speed at which their knee hits the ground when a donor enters the room. We don't live in a goddamn democracy, you fucking moron, and you know it. But you don't want to admit it. You want to pretend because it makes you feel comfortable. What about January 6th was supposed to change our mind? A bunch of yahoos in pajama bottoms and buffalo helmets without guns taking a shit in Nancy Pelosi's office? That's what you thought was going to take over our country? That's why they didn't have security there on purpose? So this very thing could happen, and so idiots like you can repeat it? You should be screaming about Citizens United and how corporate captured our government is, because the Democrats have complete control of the party right now, of government, yet they're not talking about getting rid of corporate money in government, which is the thing that actually takes us from a democracy to an oligarchy.
However, now, all eyes are on the runoff in Georgia. Look to the neocons to toss Walker under the bus and ignore the race despite its outsized Senate implications. Now, in that regard, one strategy moving forward for the establishment is a way to quell the populist uprising, and really, we're already seeing this happen. And now, we have to think about this strategically. A good way to defeat the populist movement on the right is going to be sowing discord among individual factions, creating a rift between DeSantis supporters and Trump supporters. That's how they want to weaken the party moving forward. So, be wary of narratives pushing divide and conquer. That's all I'm saying. Look, I don't know. Everyone is going to have to make their own decision moving forward, deciding whatever they believe is necessary to put a halt to the rising authoritarianism. And really, I don't know, I think both candidates can make a claim. However, from a strategic point of view, wouldn't you pit those two factions against each other, stoke the flames, and watch it all burn? Yeah, that's probably going to be the tactics. Anyway, I'm not here to tell you who to support. Make your own decision. But I will say that I would prefer Trump in 2024 and then DeSantis after that. Realistically, if we take a step back and look at the big picture, which momentarily we will go into this stuff in detail, but the point is, a new Trump administration is not going to be able to fix everything. There is just too much corruption and collusion by the establishment. The pushback is going to be monumental. The media is going to go insane. Lawsuits are going to be flying like crazy. They will come up with another, Russian collusion hoax type deal to halt any progress, to stop his policies in their tracks. They'll use the justice system as a weapon, and special interest groups are going to have a vendetta. So there's going to be a lot of lawfare going on. It's going to be tough, and that's not even considering the weaponized, corrupt intel agencies, the military-industrial complex, the global establishment, which is trying to create an overarching framework for global government. And so they're going to be trying to stop him as well. So realistically, I think we can expect a lot of bullshit, a lot of corruption, media insanity, and global interest meddling in our process. Now, if Trump can reform taxes again, make some changes to the judicial system, and basic policy changes that trend toward disintegrating the red tape bureaucracy, get our foreign policy back on track, avoiding war, get some peace treaties and business deals going between conflicting nations, get those back on track like the Abraham Accords, and just continue to red pill everyone. Because as the entire global machine comes down on him, trying to stop the policy implementation, and of course the bipolar ravings of the lunatic liberal pundits, well, the manipulation and lies are incredibly easy to see when they do this. I'll consider that a win. Oh yeah, and if Trump pulls us back out of these slimy quote-unquote environmental pacts, such as the Paris Climate Accords, Agenda 2030, etc., then yeah, that will be a win. And just a quick tangent. We'll talk more about this in a bit, but I wish people would just take a little deeper look at the climate issues being proposed. All it does is limit competition business-wise, creates a social credit system for both individuals and corporations. It merges corporations with government. Again, we'll go more into that in a little bit. But, besides that, it limits free will. Yes, their agenda is predicated on social engineering, and it liquidates wealth from the middle and lower class, consolidating it in the hands of the elite. The elite that ran the old system is going to run the new system. It's just really weird that no one looks at details and just looks at the propagandized headlines. Nothing they propose addresses any climate issue, pollution, etc. In fact, it's going to make it worse. Look into mining efforts related to their green agenda. A lot of it revolves around child labor and modern-day slavery too. And that's on top of the environmental cost. On top of all of that, it's a scheme to once again monopolize the market and siphon off new wealth. Now, if you take cobalt mining for example, which all the big tech tyrants have a little investment group together, mining cobalt and specific minerals for electric cars. Look, I wish I could explain it to the lefties in a better way. They are being played. It's a ploy. It's a ruse to control populations and to satiate their greed. Alright, so tangent over. And I don't even know. What were we talking about before? Oh yeah, so if Trump sets us on that track with the foundation set, then DeSantis can come in and continue to chip away at the rogue tyrannical machine. We need a lot of time, years to fix this stuff. And the reality is that Trump is going to be handicapped by the rhinos, the establishment in general, and will be attacked relentlessly using judicial warfare. We are going to need both of them, back to back. I think it's just easy to overlook how deep the corruption runs. So I guess to summarize, just don't fall for the divide and conquer narrative. We do not need it. We just have to put a stop to this technocratic system that's being implemented. Okay. So let's get into some things that are by far my favorite topics to discuss. Big picture stuff. How all of this is interconnected and how it is imperative to take on corruption if we want to survive as a nation. We have so many things to address, and we're going to have to do this in multiple videos. But, okay. Do you want to know what we have to do in order to save the country and restore faith in the system? Well, it all comes down to destroying the rogue political machine. We have to address the corruption. There are so many different facets to consider. Where to start? Now, I think I might have bit off more than I can chew with this video, but let's give it a shot. So based off the midterms, I think we have really 3 separate voter groups. At least for simplicity's sake, that's what I'm going to go with. The most important battle line is not Republican versus Democrat. Those are just the 2 parties that are being used to play everyone off of each other. The primary battle is between big centralized government, the establishment, versus small government, the populace. It's the authoritarians versus the non-authoritarians, with a third wheel, the uninformed voter. Yes, I say that while running a risk of sounding like a condescending asshole, but it's true. The uninformed voter is a major problem. We have to figure out a way to break through the political tribalism and to get people to think critically. But I just think people are actively voting against their interests, strictly based upon party lines. If more people looked into the details of various policies and their grand plan for the country, a massive amount of them would not want that future. Am I wrong? Let me know. But I mean, Jesus, vote blue no matter who ended up with the Democrats voting in a guy who is dead. And once again, voting in ghouls like Nancy Pelosi, who hasn't done a thing for her constituents in about 3 decades. But, they just keep voting for her. They keep voting for an individual who is running insider trading schemes with her husband, using insider government information to make bank on the stock market. And really, that's not exclusive to her, don't get me wrong. There have been over 200 representatives that have been caught investing in industries that they personally regulate. It's insane. And a lot of the times they use corporations, shell companies, family members, whatever they have to in order to obfuscate their corruption. Yet, people blindly vote them into power. And again, they re-elected people like Maxine Waters, who again has not done anything for her constituents in decades. As far as I can tell, she is just used by the establishment to gin up race division. She's basically a less effective Al Sharpton, whose only real work consists of funneling campaign cash to her daughter's bank account. But that's not all. They re-elected Gavin Newsom, which he will continue pushing Agenda 2030 initiatives. And let me ask you, how's those rolling blackouts going, California? Get ready for more of that. And of course, he's going to follow the global agenda for subjugating their population. They will continue making Californians more and more dependent on government and will decrease your standard of living. Because somehow that has turned into the definition of equity, lowering the living standards of everyone, an even playing field. Everyone's poor and there's no class mobility. I hope that sounds good, because you get what you vote for. Yes, unfortunately, I really do believe that the uninformed voter is a major, major problem. And I don't know how we get people to go a little deeper. You do not have to consume your entire life with politics to understand the game. We just need them to dig a little bit. And if they do, they will see that everything proposed is propped up on virtue and distinctly lacks any substance. It's all surface issues. The talking points make you feel good, but in actuality, these policy proposals are destroying your present and your future. You can take any issue, from gun control to crime, all the way to the environment. There is a lack of substance in all of it. They never address any real issues. It's all a mirage. So, that is a big problem. And really, I don't know how we address this besides just doing things like this, trying to put out factual information and trying to read between the lines. You really do. You really have to wade through some bullshit to get to the crux of an issue. And once you break through that initial veneer of lies, it all becomes clear. They hate you. They want to destroy your economic viability. They want you unhealthy and dependent upon big government. Oh yeah, and they want to manage the population, either through population controls, controlling population growth, as we talked about last week, or through 24/7 surveillance systems. We just have to get people to think a little more critically. Because in reality, people are just voting for globalist machine rubber stampers. The uninformed voter, as stated, voted for a guy who was already dead. We went through the crony establishment politicians like Maxine Waters, Pelosi, and Newsom, but they also voted for AOC. The squad won their races. And let's talk about Fetterman for a minute. This is really, really crazy. In the days leading up to the election, a talking point from some on the left was that it didn't matter if Fetterman can't speak publicly. It doesn't matter that he has issues interpreting audio, that he can't understand voices without text, that he can't formulate accurate and coherent sentences on the fly. None of that mattered because, and I quote, all he has to do is vote yes or no on Biden proposals. It's simple. End of quote. Rubber stampers for the global machine, the establishment. And if you take this into context, we are just one step removed from a rule by algorithm pitch. Representation doesn't matter. Just vote for the party agenda, no matter what. That's what they want you to do. It's crazy. It's insane. Political tribalism has destroyed critical thinking. Now, hopefully, that the midterms are over, we'll get a little break from the insane bullshit. And I mean, did you hear some of the stuff coming from the media regarding the elections?
A historian 50 years from now, if historians are allowed to write in this country, and if there are still free publishing houses and a free press, which I'm not certain of, but if that is true, a historian will say what was at stake tonight and this week was the fact whether we will be a democracy in the future, whether our children will be arrested and conceivably killed. We're on the edge of a brutal authoritarian system, and it could be a week away.
How can anyone with a brain take any of this seriously? It's all a joke, a farce, a mental exercise in the deliberate disassociation from reality. And that brings us to the media problem. Yes, one of the biggest problems we face is from the media itself. Now, how do we fix this issue? I have no idea. I think our best shot is just through what we are doing right now. So, corporate media is run by 6 corporations. When you get a situation like this, it's the same with big tech really, which we'll get into probably in the next video. But when you get into a situation like this, where entire industries are run by a handful of companies, of which are specifically pushing a specific political message, well, when that happens, you get this strange Orwellian reality. Yes, it's the one we're currently living in. The lies are non-stop, the collusion is of epic proportions, and every idea pushed on these networks is run through quality control, which means that if a story impacts a political candidate that might further the financial interests of said company, well, then they axe the story. They will lie, they will parrot talking points, they will only host certain politicians on those networks, and in the hiring practice they will ensure only to hire hive mind employees. However, one of the most insidious aspects that really bothers me, on an existential level, really, it does. I feel a pain in my soul from time to time when thinking about this, but it's the projection. It hurts the soul because it works. Now, as we know, it's a tactic popularized by Saul Alinsky in Rules for Radicals. Accuse your opponent of which you are guilty. It's to a whole new level these days, at least it feels that way. But this stuff has been going on for a long time. We hear constantly that if you vote Republican, it's the end of democracy itself, when in reality, it's the establishment destroying democracy, the Republic. They are destroying it at every turn. I mean, look, the current administration is jailing political dissidents, raiding journalists with the FBI. The Department of Justice is going after political opponents to the regime. January 6th protesters are still in solitary and have been in jail for years at this point. They are targeting pro-life groups, having the FBI arrest them when Jane's Revenge, who was firebombing pregnancy centers, well, that story fell to the wayside. They are letting clear, violent domestic terrorists go while arresting pro-life pastors. However, that's not all. They are also changing election procedures to ensure victories in key states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada. They are determined to get rid of checks and balances on power. They want to subvert the Supreme Court. They want to get rid of the Electoral College. They want to change constitutional rights. They want to limit your ability to challenge corruption. They advocate for a massive centralized government. They use the private sector to target citizens, censoring speech. And on top of that, they are using the banks as a way to financially persecute political dissidents too, via quote-unquote debanking. Now, I could go on and on. If there's anyone destroying democracy or the Republic, it ain't the populist right, it's the establishment. However, the media just parrots the projection. The media lies are just too much to handle too. It's non-stop. Now all of this ties together. The uninformed voter and the lying media are inextricably linked. I mean, we got people still running around claiming that the Russian collusion hoax was real, despite handwritten notes from the FBI and John Brennan proving that it was all made up by the Clinton campaign. We have the bank transfers between Perkins Coie law firm, the DNC, and the Clinton campaign. They have proof that they paid Christopher Steele to create the dossier, and that the FBI planned on paying him $1 million extra if he would provide proof, of which he could not. The real crazy part is that the media ran with this narrative for 5 years. There are so many other examples too, but to save time, we won't go through all of them. I think you get my point. However, this brings us to the weaponized intel agencies. Yes, another massive problem we face is the rogue intel agencies. Schumer was not lying when he said if you piss them off, they have 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you. That turned out to be very, very true. As we talked about, they were all in on the Russian collusion hoax, which halted any gains during Trump's presidency and led to an impeachment trial. It was all based on a lie perpetuated by intel agencies and the establishment. Now, this is really crazy stuff. In order to truly regain control of the country, we have to do something about this. We need investigations, we need accountability. The fact is, with this level of corruption, subversion, and evil acts being perpetrated by intel agencies and the media, we cannot survive. This has to be addressed. It's tough because this goes back a long, long time, and their attacks on the domestic population are only going to increase. Check this out.
You briefed the press, did you not, when you were there?
Well, I had several jobs. One of my jobs was that of analyst. I also was an interrogator and indeed briefed the press when we, the CIA, wanted to circulate disinformation on a particular issue. Disinformation is not necessarily a lie. It may be a half-truth. And we would pick out a journalist. I would go do the briefing and hope that he would put the information in print. For instance, if we wanted to get across to the American public that the North Vietnamese were building up their force structure in South Vietnam, I would go to a journalist and advise him that in the past 6 months, X number of North Vietnamese forces had come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail system through southern Laos. Now, there is no way a journalist can check that information. So either he goes with the information or he doesn't, and ordinarily or usually the journalist would go with it because it looked like some kind of exclusive. And I would say our percentage planning that kind of data was 70 to 80%. The correspondents we targeted were those who had terrific influence, the most respected journalists in Saigon, like Robert Chaplin of the New Yorker magazine, Kai's Beach of the Los Angeles Times from time to time, and also he worked for the Chicago Daily News. Bud Merrick of U.S. News and World Report, Malcolm Brown of the New York Times, even Maynard Parker of Newsweek magazine. We would go after these gentlemen. I would be directed to cultivate them, to spend time with them at the Caravel Hotel or the Continental Hotel, to socialize with them, and slowly but surely to try to gain their confidence by dolloping out valid information which was true. And then I would drop into a conversation the data that we wanted to get across, which might not be true. One piece of data, for instance, that we managed to plan in the New Yorker magazine had to do with a supposed North Vietnamese effort in 1973 to develop airfields along the border of South Vietnam. The reason we wanted to plant this information was that we were trying to persuade the U.S. Congress that Saigon should continue to get a great deal of aid, and that the North Vietnamese were the chief violators of the ceasefire accord. That was printed in the New Yorker magazine under the byline of Robert Chaplin, as indeed was a great deal of such information which we tried to circulate. If I planted a piece of information with a reporter, I would ordinarily then try to create an environment in which he could not check the information. I would go to the British ambassador and brief him on the disinformation I had just given the reporter. So when the reporter wanted to cross-check what I'd told him with, say, the British ambassador, New Zealand ambassador, or what have you, he would get false confirmation, the same message coming back at him, and he'd say, aha, I've got proof that Frank Snepp told me the truth, when in fact what he'd gotten was simply an echo of what I'd given him in the first place via the British ambassador or other of our friendly diplomatic contacts. I am, as an ex-CIA agent, opposed to the disinformation activities in which I was involved. I admit that I was involved, and I think it served no useful purpose. Propagandizing the American public or Congress is not the CIA's job.
Yes, Operation Mockingbird has been verified. There was a massive trial in the 70s, and one massive issue again is people being uninformed. I just don't know how people believe that they just stopped this strategy after they got caught. Are you brain dead? The intel agencies are connected to the media. I mean, just take CNN and MSNBC for example. I think they're up to about 20 intel agents working in their companies. And on top of that, they trot out the establishment intel agents all the time to demonize more than half the country as terrorists. Yes, they still bring on guys like John Brennan and Peter Strzok. They are still on TV from time to time. Intel agents who help destroy the media's credibility are still invited back. And for what? As if we're supposed to accept them as a trusted source of information? Are you insane? However, we also get stories like this from a former CIA officer at NBC News. Yes, in this article, he declares that he used to work on Al-Qaeda. And yes, he believes that they should attack the right, US citizens, in the same manner that they attacked Al-Qaeda. This is the state of the world. It's all so very insane. The media is the establishment. They have developed relationships. Journalists have intel agents on speed dial. They get calls from the CIA on what stories to run, what stories not to run, and they get tips on what stories to pursue. If they do not do what they want, they don't get the scoops anymore, and that could affect their career, so they do it. And really, at this point, I think fear plays a big role. I think a lot of journalists understand the authoritarian nature of the US establishment and know if they run afoul of the powers that be, well, they may end up without a job, blacklisted, or hell, who knows. They could even end up like various other journalists who have had quote-unquote accidents and wind up dead. The lies from the media needs to be stopped. The divide and conquer strategies, the deliberate actions taken to rile up unstable political extremists. They actively target and dox people now. The media is just used by the political establishment to sow division, misinform, confuse, and to placate. And really, I don't know what we can do, besides just prop up independent journalists and fight like hell against censorship campaigns. We have to have alternate viewpoints, and the only way to ensure we have that is by making sure they can't centralize the dissemination of information, which is exactly why they are actively trying to merge big tech into government operations. However, we'll get into that in a different video. Now, the media is a massive problem because that's how the average person gains an understanding of current events, and currently, they aren't getting an accurate depiction of reality. Well, I guess I'll quote a tweet from Kim.com. And I quote, "It doesn't matter who wins tonight, the US debt will not disappear. The de-dollarization of the global financial system will not stop. Inflation is going crazy. Major US stock market crash incoming. Recession will turn into a depression. Neither the GOP nor the DNC can change any of that." End of quote. And after the results came in, unfortunately, I think he might be right. There's a lot of momentum for the destruction agenda. We have to keep trying though. Everyone who was asleep will eventually be saying, "How did this happen?" Well, you kept voting for the same corrupt establishment. And I just don't trust any of them. I think they're all in on it. It's been a plan for a long, long time. And the thing is, what if they believe that it's the only way forward? That this new system is the only way to move within the parallels that the technological revolution have created. You know what I mean? The theory being that governance has to move alongside technological progress. Times change, functions change, and the system must adapt to survive. Now, I'm not sold on that theory 100%, but what if the powers that be understand that technology is a direct threat to their power, unless they harness it and use it to control the population? Both sides of the aisle, naturally, based on human nature that is, of course they want to retain power, and political foes will come together to ensure their mutual survival. That's not a stretch. I mean, look, I don't trust McCarthy, I don't trust McConnell, I don't trust Lindsey Graham, I don't trust any of the rhinos. I do not trust the establishment, and I don't trust the establishment to do what's best for the people. It's all a self-serving game at this point, and people just keep voting for the same corrupt people. Now, voting does matter. I hope you did vote. The fact remains is that we have no choice but to operate within the parameters of our political system. We have no choice but to continue to vote. I just think people keep voting for the same bullshit crony politicians. Typically, though, it's through being misinformed by the media. And this as well is a broader problem with our political system. We have let the media infect the core of our political process, through their coverage of candidates even. We have moved into this strange, artificial, fake plastic era, the age of the politician. Well, we've been in this era for a long time. But you cannot convince me that these politicians are the best we can offer the public arena. Now don't get me wrong, there are some solid ones, some good politicians. But in general, these are not the brightest intellectual minds. They are not. However, in politics, a perfect, once again manufactured persona takes precedent over real people. There are just so many little things that are disqualifying. And the media is so insane that the best minds out there, people who could actually make good changes, well, they refuse to enter the race because of all the baggage that comes along with it. And if you do enter into a political race, they'll prop up the plastic puppets like Gavin Newsom, a shell of a human being, just saying whatever the special interests pay him to say, and they'll demonize and destroy the life of the average individual compelled to serve. I don't know. We have a lot of problems. However, I think one key aspect to everything going on, and one of the main avenues regarding how we can move forward, comes down to the Jeffrey Epstein case. If you want to save the nation, I think we need to investigate this thoroughly and hold people to account too. Do I think that's likely? No, I do not. No, I do not. Considering just how massive this story is and how many people would be indicted, and how many people would have their entire legacy destroyed by the revelations, it's because of that I do not think we will see any true accountability. One reason for this, and why this story is ignored by most mainstream media, is because Jeffrey Epstein's story opens a window to a whole world of corruption, a world so depraved, so dark, and so desolate, that many fear it threatens to destroy the entire nation. However, as stated, letting this go also destroys everything. We cannot let this go. We just can't. Under no circumstances are we to let this go. Now, once you get through all of the sinister sex trafficking and blackmail aspects to the story, yes, the undercurrent of this tale of corruption revolves around financial crime, pay-to-play schemes, and conflicting operations between various world governments. Yes, they were all in on this, but one thing that has not been examined completely are the financial crimes related to politics. The Epstein case opens the door to all of that being revealed, which is why no one wants it though. Yes, even recently, I've heard Epstein being described as a Rosetta Stone for world corruption. He unlocks a door to the whole thing. So the Epstein case is very complicated, and there's a lot of connections to make, a lot of dense research. So basically, we're going to kinda meander around this topic a bit, because I just want to refresh my memory a little and try to work through a few questions I have. Anyway, we have to get to the bottom of this. And to really wrap our heads around how important this story is, we have to go back in time. Yes, this all ties into the issues with rogue intel agencies. All of this started in Prohibition with honeypot schemes. The mob would get compromising info on politicians or whoever, and would then blackmail them into letting things slide. Well, the government saw how effective this was, and really, I'm sure it goes back deeper, but we'll stick with this for now. Anyway, during World War II, the OSS was created, and the OSS was the original name for what became the CIA. Anyway, the newly formed intel agency was engaged in blackmail schemes, working directly with the mob in some cases, and this strategy never really changed. Now, this all really ramped up with operations being conducted and justified out of quote-unquote wartime necessity, fighting the Nazis. However, it never ended. They've been rogue for a long time. From there, of course, we know that J. Edgar Hoover was blackmailed by the mob, and then again, this reinforced how effective this was. And from there, he started to do the same exact thing, Hoover's secret files. You see, the CIA and the FBI have been engaged in this behavior since the beginning. We are just now realizing to what extent. Okay, but in reality, Jeffrey Epstein is often touted as the mastermind. However, I do not think that's entirely accurate. Based on what I have researched, this is far more common than most want to admit, and Epstein wasn't especially special. He was more of a middle management guy, a cog in the machine, and that realization alone is probably more upsetting than most would like to admit, or perhaps that's why they do not look into it. Can you imagine reading all of the horrific things that Epstein and his pals did to innocent young women, girls really, and then finding out that that's not even the worst part. The worst part is the extent to which it happens, how many leaders are involved, and how often it happens. It still happens. We just do not know who the quote-unquote new Epstein is. Someone took his place. They didn't just stop. Anyway, Epstein was directly tied to intel agencies. For example, we have this guy, Alex Acosta, who said, and I quote, one of the reasons he was pressured into giving Jeffrey Epstein his first sweetheart deal was because he was directly told, and I quote, that Epstein belonged to intelligence. Now, was he on the payroll? Was he just an asset? And which intel agencies? We don't know. I mean, look, Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted of sex trafficking to nobody. They won't release the names on that list. This goes back so far and runs so deep that it's kind of hard to articulate in succinct fashion. But let's give it a shot. Okay, so Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father, was running the same blackmail schemes for Mossad. He had ties to the Eastern Bloc, the KGB, and he worked with various world governments on these types of operations. Robert Maxwell played a big role in one particular scandal to sell bug software to nuclear agencies in the US. It had a backdoor in it, and through the bug software, he sold out American secrets to various world governments. He sold our national nuclear secrets. Of course, Robert Maxwell was also involved with aspects to Iran-Contra, which of course involved US intel agencies. And again, Iran-Contra is also tied to the Clintons, and we might get into that. However, let's move on. So there is one problem when you're doing all that sketchy shit. Well, you end up dead eventually. And that's exactly what happened to Robert Maxwell. According to Ghislaine Maxwell herself, she claims that her father was murdered by rogue Mossad agents and an Italian crime syndicate. Just to refresh your memory, he was found dead off his yacht in 1991. Okay. Anyway, we know that Roy Cohn was the Epstein-Robert Maxwell figure in the US. He was running blackmail operations for US-based intel agencies, hell, from the late 60s onward. So, could Robert Maxwell have been talking with Epstein because he was trying to move into the quote-unquote US market for intel-based blackmail operations? I don't know. The timing is questionable. So, Roy Cohn died in 1986. Epstein starts to show up at Robert Maxwell's office in the UK during that same time period. Now, it is kind of hard to track down, but Epstein at the time was active in the UK. He was actually being mentored by a British arms dealer named Douglas Leese with British intelligence connections. And from there, of course, Robert Maxwell is killed in 1991. And then right after that, Ghislaine and Epstein take over. And it's not only to assume Robert Maxwell's operations, but they move in and take over for Roy Cohn as well. The fact remains, this is how deep this stuff goes. The rogue elements of our country run deep. Again, I think I bit off a bit more than I could chew with this video. But keep in mind, these influence operations have been around forever and are more insane today. With agencies like the NSA listening and recording to all your interactions, if you are a politician, they will find a way to manage you. They will get some dirt on you. And I just don't know how so many people have a tough time understanding this. However, it could just be cognitive dissonance. Maybe it's just too effed up for people to accept. And okay, maybe I'm getting too deep into the weeds here on the Epstein stuff, and I'll just have to do another video on it. But really my point is that intel agencies, certain political families, US oligarchs, and politicians who were involved with the Epstein scandal are still in power and are working towards their vision, their agenda, which we could debate. Some believe it's all business, selling out the United States based on their greed, which could certainly be true. But I also feel like there is an ideological tint to it as well. The same exact people involved with these aspects of corruption are involved in politics today. And really, many of these same individuals are now perpetuating this global World Economic Forum vision in order for our country to survive. Or if we are going to hop off this authoritarian trajectory, the main thing we need to do is root out corruption. One of the best ways to do this would be investigating the Epstein case and holding everyone to account. The Epstein case connects intel agencies with the mob. It connects to Iran-Contra via Robert Maxwell. The corrupt Iran-Contra guys are connected to Chinagate. And just to refresh your memory, Bill Clinton was selling China our military tech for campaign contributions. The Clinton-Chinagate scandal was run by Mark Middleton, the guy who was setting up the Epstein White House visits. And of course, Mark Middleton was the guy that was found dead hanging in a tree with a shotgun blast to the chest. Yes, he was the one running Chinagate and Epstein to Bill Clinton. Anyway, the Epstein case connects to various financial crimes, political corruption, and ties political figures to corrupt businessmen like Leslie Wexner. If we start pulling these threads and have real investigations, we will uncover a vast network of political corruption and depraved violent crime. However, as John McCain's wife said, and I quote, "We all knew about what Epstein was doing," end of quote. Yes, high-level government officials, politicians, DC insiders, they know what the truth is. And we've talked about it quite a bit. But the intel agencies are just running protection for these corrupt individuals and act as the cleanup squad, hiding all of their dirty secrets from prying eyes. And now we are seeing them directly attack political opponents of the regime. We have no choice. We need to rein in these intel agencies. The point to all of that was to highlight just how deep the corruption goes and how dark that thread can get. The Epstein case is a microcosm of various political corruption schemes. It's a door to it all. Okay, so up next we have to talk about COP27. But once again, this is HelioWave. If you like the content, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video if you want to. If you're in a position to, consider subscribing on Locals or Subscribestar. As always, make sure you disobey those true fascistas. And yes, I do hope you have a good night.